Before Congressman Cole begins speaking, know that you are in listen-only mode until you ask a question. If you'd like to be in the queue to ask the Congressman a question, press *3 on your telephone. Again, to ask Congressman Cole a question, just press *3 on your telephone, and you'll have the opportunity to explain your question with a staff member and then return to listen. We might not have time for everyone's questions during the hour, but be sure to listen for your first name and location in case your question comes up. You'll have the chance to ask your question live on the call with the Congressman at that time. One last thing before we hear from Congressman Cole. If you would like to opt in to future calls like this, please press 1 now. Again, to opt in to future telephone town halls, press 1 now. Now we'll go live with Congressman Cole and hear a few words about the latest in Washington and the 4th District. Congressman?
Thank you very much, Sarah. And for those of you all, thank you for joining us. I very much appreciate it. You know, I was trying to think about the last several months and how extraordinary they've been, and I was struck by the old Dickens line, it's been the best of times, it's been the worst of times. Let's start off with some things that point to optimism. The first one, of course, is the success of Operation Warp Speed and the fact that we not only have developed vaccines faster than any time in human history, that we're distributing them and there seems to be strong public support. That doesn't mean, by the way, that the virus crisis is over. I would still urge you to continue to wear masks, continue to socially distance, continue to be cautious. But the reality is we have made a substantial amount of progress. We need to keep our foot on the metal, but you know, in the next several months, we do have the chance to finally put this awful virus, global pandemic, behind us, and that's due in no small measure to the brilliance of American science and the willingness of the American people to fund the effort that actually provided us not one but multiple vaccines that are clearly testing well and being effective. Second area I would say where we need to be optimistic is the economy. I think for the next several months we'll have pretty good economic growth. Now we're coming off some really bad numbers from the pandemic, but the reality is we had very good job creation numbers, several hundred thousand, I think over 350,000 last month. Looks like we may do better. We'll know about that toward the end of this week, this month, and I expect that to continue. In part, that's due, honestly, to the foundation that was laid last year. We talk a lot about the partisanship and the gridlock in Washington, and there certainly is some of that. I'll get to that in a minute. But last year, Congress did work in a bipartisan manner to pass 5 different coronavirus relief bills that I think not only cushioned the economic fallout from the pandemic, but positioned the country to recover more rapidly than perhaps many thought they could. Those 5 bills interjected over $4 trillion into the economy. They saved thousands of small businesses. They helped millions of Americans that were unemployed through no fault of their own. And, of course, most importantly, they funded the discovery and the production of the vaccines that now are giving us the opportunity to actually get on top of this crisis. When I say worst of times, frankly, I'm concerned about several developments over the last few months. The new administration came in and we saw a flurry of presidential executive orders and actions that I think, some I agreed with, by the way, dealt with coronavirus, some, though, I think are very dangerous. On the energy front, certainly the decision to shut down the Keystone pipeline cost us 11,000 jobs and alienated, or at least irritated, a good friend and ally in Canada. And finally, you know, endangered something that we've achieved with great effort in the last few years, and that's North American energy independence. There were other decisions that worry me there. The decision to suspend permitting for new exploration and development of oil and natural gas on public lands and in public waters. Those things, again, long term, not only make the country more dependent on foreign sources, they eventually drive up, you're already seeing it, I think, to some degree, the price of gasoline and the cost of heating and cooling your home, those sorts of things, and they can spark inflation when energy costs get out of hand. So that worries me. Second area of concern was the decision by, again, the new administration to send a green light, if you will, to Central America that things were going to be different on the border. And they are different. And we've had an explosion of unaccompanied minors coming across the border. People, I think, justifiably point out this has happened before. The Obama administration, happened in the Trump administration, but not on this scale and this speed. And I think this is a problem that's apt to get a lot worse before it gets better. Personally, I think it's a big mistake to end the border wall. That's not the only answer, but that does work. A big mistake to announce you're not going to deport people, even people that have committed crime, for 100 days. That's now subject to court action. And a big mistake to probably signal that you're not going to have to wait in Mexico for asylum hearings. You can get one immediately. That effectively means you get into the country, you've got 2.5 years before your trial, and the reality is you're probably not going to be deported. And by the way, those seeking asylum, the court system's over 85% really aren't justified asylum cases or aren't accepted by the court. So I think we've really compounded our problem on the border. Third thing for me is after 5 bipartisan bills on coronavirus relief, we passed one on a strictly partisan bill, the so-called American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion. And on $1.9 trillion, there's certainly some good things. We did more work on vaccine development and distribution. That's a good thing. I think we provided checks to individual Americans. I would have been more targeted in that, but I think the basic thrust of that program I supported honestly late in 2020 and certainly have no objections to it in 2021. But there's some other areas that we spent a lot of money that don't have anything to do with coronavirus. We spent tens of billions of dollars on what are called multi-employer pension plans that are going bankrupt without demanding any reforms. Now, again, we can debate the wisdom of that, but it has nothing to do with coronavirus. We spent a lot of money on more than's necessary on state and local governments, in my opinion. I've had extensive discussions with our governor, with our state legislature. They really didn't suffer anywhere near the loss of revenue that the federal government did, partly because property taxes and sales taxes at the local level and at the state level on sales taxes it turned out to be much more resistant to the change in economic activity. So, again, we spent a lot of money, and we, by the way, changed the formula in ways that moved money away from Oklahoma. The original time we gave money in March of last year in the CARES Act to state and local governments, we basically apportioned that money on the basis of population. We changed that to unemployment rates, and that punished states that had kept their economies open, like Oklahoma. We're going to get $500 million or so less than we would have gotten under the old formula. That's true of a lot of red states. Conversely, states like Illinois, states like New York, California get considerably more money than they otherwise would have. And again, big states like Florida and Texas that tend to lean red, less money. So I think that was a mistake, and that's why that plan was partisan. We could have had a bipartisan deal, but I think Democrats chose to use something called a reconciliation process to push ahead and had the votes to do it. I am worried, too, as I hear today about the new infrastructure proposal. Again, I think we can find some things, certainly in terms of roads, bridges, waterways, and broadband that everybody would agree on, and find ways to pay for them. But if one actually looks at the proposal the president unveiled today, it's got extraordinarily higher taxes, raises taxes on American corporations by a third. There's a lot of other tax provisions in it that I think will be counterproductive. And anybody that thinks when you raise taxes on American business, it doesn't get passed on in the form of higher costs to American consumers, I think is wrong. And I also think you raise the corporate tax rate. One of the reasons we cut it is because a lot of American businesses are moving overseas and taking their jobs and their corporate headquarters with them. We're going to try and stop that with some measures in this bill, but the reality is higher tax rates discourage business creation and innovation here. Having said all that, I don't want people to think there's no areas of cooperation between the two parties in Washington, D.C. There actually are some right now. Recently, the House passed something called the Violence Against Women Act. It's been an area of bipartisan cooperation. There's some things in it I would like to see changed in the Senate, and I think will be. But the basic thrust of the legislation, protecting vulnerable women and children in domestic abuse situations, and frankly, enhancing protection of Native populations by increasing the authority that tribal courts and police officers have, I think it's a good thing. There's serious discussion involving both parties and the administration on the War Powers Act. I think all of us, regardless of party, would agree that Congress has allowed the executive branch, under both Democrats and Republicans, to get us into conflict far too easily without Congress voting on it. So we actually held hearings in the last couple of weeks in both the Rules Committee, where I sit, and in the Foreign Relations Committee. And one would be surprised how much bipartisanship there was in those hearings. And frankly, to the administration's credit, a willingness to sit down and talk about this. The Biden administration has said it too thinks congressional war-making authorities eroded. So perhaps we can find some solid ground there that we can work together on. Other areas where I think there's opportunities to work together are relocating the supply chain. One of the things the pandemic showed us is how vulnerable we are to supply chains overseas. We see this right now in two areas in particular: pharmaceuticals, where a lot of our basic products that we need really come from China, even though the final manufacturing is in the United States. And same thing, by the way, is true with chip production, where a lot of that is, again, in countries that are hostile to us, or at least outside the United States. So I think you're going to see Congress try to figure out ways. There's some great legislation with tax credits to encourage the relocation of basic industries into this country, and I think those things will have bipartisan support. And finally, I would hope on the basic funding of government, that is the day-to-day appropriation, so we don't have a government shutdown, we can find, again, common ground. The Appropriations Committee is waiting on the president's budget. It's a little bit slow in arriving. That, by the way, is not unusual for a new administration. It takes a while to get your act together, so, but we should be seeing that. And then the Appropriations Committee will work through. The basic funding of government, by the way, is something you can't do reconciliation on. That is a narrow majority. I mean, you do have to pass these bills. There still is a 60-vote rule in the Senate, although I guess there's some question as to whether that will remain. We'll see in the weeks and months ahead. But I'm hopeful that the two parties and the administration can come together and make sure that the country's appropriately funded, its government and its basic institutions in the coming months. That's something that we won't reach a crisis point on until September. Looking down the road, I think the thing that I probably worry the most about is a recovering economy and a huge injection of money and artificially low interest rates as we recover could easily kick off inflation. And that could, again, start raising the cost of basic staples that every American needs. So far, we've seen a little bit of that. We're certainly seeing a lot of it at the gasoline pump and at the grocery store. It hasn't gotten out of hand yet, but again, it's something to watch going forward. And some of the concerns of some of us that thought the American Rescue Plan was too expensive is the fact that it's putting a lot of money in the economy without a commensurate increase in production, and that could, again, lead to inflation. But it's interesting. We see economists across the ideological spectrum actually disagreeing about that. Some noted Democratic economists have said this is a real danger. Some Republican economists, and I actually would put the current head of the Fed, Federal Reserve, Jerome Powers, in that category, don't think so. So it's actually an area of disagreement that doesn't fall neatly along ideological or partisan lines. But inflation, once it gets out of hand, is a dangerous commodity, and getting it back in control is a very, very difficult task. So it's a place where I think we should be cautious, but I think so far we have not been. With that, Sarah, why don't I just close it off, and you, if you would, tell people how they can ask questions. Let's start answering questions that people have.
Sure. Well, just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, just press *3 on your telephone. That'll take you to one of our staff members to ask your question and then return to the call. And be sure to listen for your name and location in case your question comes up so you can ask a congressman live on the call. First question is from Tiffany. Has a question about the border. She's calling from Ninica.
Hey, Tiffany, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Congressman Cole, how are you doing this evening? Well, I hope.
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
I've got a kind of an important question. It's very it concerns me. It scares me. We've got 70,000 migrants coming across our border at a rapid pace, and they have had our country shut down over this virus for over a year now. And there's states all over the country that they're not allowing their children to go back to school. Of course, luckily Oklahoma has been back in school since August, thank goodness. But they're not testing these migrants for this virus that they've had to shut down, and oh my gosh, grandma's gonna die, and blah 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 blah. Wear your mask. It's a horrible virus. But you got 70,000 migrants coming across. They're detained for a couple of hours, and they're bused to McAllen, Texas, and then they're just cut loose, and they're not being tested. That is asking for to say super spreader is an understatement. Congressman Cole, what can you and what will you do to do something about this? My mother-in-law, she is going to be 63 years old in July, and she has stage 4 COPD.
Yeah, well, you put your finger on a real. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Are you finished with your question?
People. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Tiffany. Thank you. Well, couldn't agree more. Honestly, it's unacceptable that we would let people into the country and literally start moving them around the country without testing them first. You wouldn't have that ability if you flew into the country legally. You certainly shouldn't have it if you arrive illegally, and they're doing it, because they're overwhelmed. They don't have the facilities at the border to take care of people. But we do know that about 9% of the people coming in so far that have been tested have tested positive for COVID. Now, obviously, once we test them, we segregate that population, but they've moved through the country in many cases, and we're not testing everybody. We're bringing a lot of pressure on the administration. The Congress is very narrowly divided. Remember, it's a 50-50 Senate. In the House, it takes 218 for a majority. There's 212 Republicans, so very close there. But the president's done most of this by executive order, and he's dismantled what President Trump had in place that at least gave us a measure of security. Now, we still could, if we chose to. There's something called Article 42, which allows us to not allow anybody in the country in the health care prices. But the Biden administration has chosen not to do that where unaccompanied minors are concerned. In the past, we just sent them back to their country of origin. We did not send them out into the desert to die, as somebody charged, nor did we just turn them back. They could either wait in Mexico, or we would fly them back to wherever they were from safely, so they weren't going back, in the company of coyotes. That to me is something we ought to do. If you can't test, you shouldn't be allowed into the country right now. We're just getting on top of this virus. We ought to continue to be very vigilant on it. And indeed, people are asking Americans to continue to wear masks. I think they should, to continually social distance. I think they should. We certainly shouldn't expect any less of people coming into the country legally or illegally.
Well, I guess we can move on to our next question. Again, if you would like to ask a question, just press *3 on your telephone. And if you would like to opt into future calls like this, just press 1. Our next question comes from Cynthia from Lawton.
Hey, Cynthia. How are you?
Hi. How are you today?
Good.
Well, I'm glad
to hear that. Had the pleasure
of
being in Lawton yesterday, actually.
Oh, really? Well,
yeah.
You've missed it, but you at least were here for good weather. Not
Well,
wasting your time here. I just want to know where we are scratching up these trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to give away.
well, we're printing them basically. I mean,
Okay.
we just borrowed money, borrowed and
Where are
printed
we
money.
borrowing the money from?
Well, we actually borrow a lot of it from ourselves. That is, the Federal Reserve buys the bonds issued by the United States government, but foreigners buy it as well. American treasuries are still considered the most secure. The United States has never defaulted on a debt, since its creation, and no other country has a record like that. So even at relatively low interest rates, there are buyers, and Americans buy treasuries, although fewer and fewer because the yield is so low, and you see a lot of people that would normally rather have a bond actually pouring into the stock market. It's one of the things that's pushing up the markets there. But, your basic point that this is debt that's going to have to be dealt with is correct, and sooner or later we're going to have to deal with it. That's been the big difference on the last two coronavirus packages. If you remember in the summer, we passed our last of the 5 packages last year, actually in March, last before the election. We passed one in December too, but in March, and then the two parties differed in July. Both parties agreed you needed to spend more money, but Speaker Pelosi wanted to spend over $3 trillion. The Republicans in the Senate about $1 trillion. That stalled things out at a critical time. Eventually, they both settled at $900 billion at the end of the year in December, and then we saw, of course, this much larger, more robust American Rescue Plan, where the Republican senators put forward about a $600 billion bill. I think they probably would have compromised up on, but that wasn't acceptable to the president and the Democrats, and they had the votes to move under reconciliation and do a larger one. So, it's a roll of the dice on their part. They think there won't be inflation, and they're not too worried about the debt. So I disagree with both those views, but again, they had the votes and they prevailed.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. And our next question comes from Mitch from Walford.
Hey, Mitch, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Hello, Congressman Cole. It's good of you to do these meetings. It's real nice to be able to be in contact with our congressman.
Well, appreciate you taking the time.
Okay. My concern, my major concern is I'm a hunter and I own guns, and I actually have an AR platform gun, and I'm just worried about the gun legislation that's coming down the pipe. Also, I want to be able to protect my family and protect my home, and I don't want anybody telling me what I can and can't do that with. So what do you have? And one more question. They're always talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, and there's 50-50, but surely there's some conservative Democrats out there that have gun owners in their states and hunters in their states that are not going to go with extreme measures. So I'd like to know your take.
I would hope so. There certainly are some. I think of my friend Henry Cuellar he's a good Democrat from Texas, and on the gun issue, he wouldn't look at it very much differently than you and I would look at it. We did 2 gun control measures that mostly related to background checks that passed, but there's no question there are plenty of people that would limit your ability to have an AR-15, for instance. And we just don't have the number of conservative Democrats that we had. The Democratic Party has moved well to the left, particularly on this issue. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to stop this in the Senate. Again, as long as the filibuster holds, we will be able to stop it. They would have to get to 60 votes. The real question is, will the Democrats get rid of the filibuster on this issue and a number of others, as some of them threatened to do? So all I can tell you is our delegation in Oklahoma has been very united against this, both in the House and the Senate. You don't have to worry where our voters are going to be on this, but I do think it's going to be a close-run thing if they get rid of the filibuster. Now, there are Democrats, particularly in the Senate, that are more conservative than Democrats in the House. I think of folks that represent places like Montana and Arizona, where there's a very strong pro-Second Amendment movement. They've given indications that they are not in favor of extreme measures. So, I'm hopeful we can have a bipartisan alliance. But, in the early days of administration, people tend to give a new president what he wants or she wants. We haven't gotten to that day yet, but we will. And they have a sort of honeymoon period where they're able to move big items. And so, you worry in this period of time that people may decide, well, I want to help the president. And the president, has said, he wants to take some executive action. He hasn't specified what those are. I think, he'd be in court immediately if he did anything that truly jeopardized the Second Amendment. But, it's just a difficult time. But, again, our votes in our state are going to be lined up no. It's going to be a close, hard-fought issue, and so far we've been able to prevail. I hope we'll be able to do that going forward.
All right. Our next question comes from Justin from Oklahoma City.
Hey, Justin, how are you?
Doing good. Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for hosting this. I really enjoy these. Hey, my question is as the U.S. economy reopens, we all hope the economic engine is just going to come roaring back to life and we go back to normal. But I think there's some factors out there, the hurdles we're gonna have to face. There has been a change. I mean, people's habits have changed. You have a lot of businesses out there, like for example, Best Buy is moving everything online, and a lot more businesses are following them. And if they go completely online, what was traditional retail and traditional brick and mortar, there's still going to be a gut of unemployed people without jobs out there. Is that something we're kind of forecasting in the future? Is there a plan to
I think we're still about 9 million jobs off where we were in February of last year, which was, the lowest unemployment we'd had in 50 years and the fastest wage growth. So while we've come back, and I expect us to continue to come back, I think you make a really good point. You can't go through something like we've just gone through and think there's not going to be any changes. And I think we are at a different place in terms of people's willingness to skip the retail brick and mortar experience and just go straight to ordering online. And that does end thousands of jobs, tens of thousands. Same thing's true with the hospitality restaurant industry to some degree. We've lost a lot of those industries, and indeed in December had an overall job loss, almost all of which was restaurants, travel, that kind of thing. There are some encouraging signs there, though. We do see air traffic has come back a lot stronger, and you see this in aircraft orders. I know the Southwest just placed the largest order Boeing had in 3 years. That suggests their confidence that air travel and everything that accompanies that is coming back. So again, I think we're going to have some changes in the shape of the economy, and there's going to be some winners and losers. Now we have take Oklahoma. We have a major Amazon site in the Oklahoma City area that's been hiring like crazy, and Amazon throughout this has. So there are creation of warehouse jobs and things of that nature, and more skilled positions as well. You're going to see more broadband, and that is a job that is labor intensive in terms of constructing the lines and what have you. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think you're right. The economy will have a different shape to it. There are other areas that don't seem to. Home building is doing great. I don't talk to a home builder whose business is not up 20 to 25% and who's looking for labor. Manufacturing has done surprisingly well. People continue to order things that are built. The auto industry doing really, really well. So it's just very uneven in how COVID has hit the economy and who the winners and losers have been. But you're right. The economy is going to be fundamentally different. We're going to have to look at that and figure out what can we do to incentivize people either come back into older areas and to restore the economic base, or provide new economic opportunities for people that have been displaced. But again, I expect at least several months of pretty robust job creation, and last month suggested that's true. We'll see at the end of this week, what this month looks like, but it looks optimistic, so I'm hopeful.
All right. Our next question comes from Edna from Sulphur. Should be live shortly.
Hey, Edna, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Are you with us?
Hello there, Congressman Cole. I'm happy to be able to be a part of your forum.
Great to have you on the phone.
Thank you. The oil and gas industry is being hit by our administration in a big way, and especially the Keystone Pipeline. I'd like to know specifically what our conservative people in Washington are doing and are going to do about keeping everything alive and returning back the pipeline, and also allowing these leases to be executed on government land.
Well, we're putting as much pressure on the county. In terms of the pipeline, the president, has the executive authority because it crosses an international border to effectively stop it. Half the line is built on, actually more than that. The part from Cushing down to the Gulf refineries where that oil was destined was finished years ago during the Obama administration, and we have big stretches of it built. That's a sad thing. This thing that wasn't that far away from being completed, and the oil, by the way, is still coming. It's just going to come on rail and by truck, and no disrespect to those industries, but that's neither as efficient nor as safe. It's actually more greenhouse inefficient than moving it by pipe, and it's dangerous. You have much more chance of spillage and accident in that situation. So that's a problem. In terms of the use on federal lands of permitting, it's a kind of a two-edged sword. In the short run in Oklahoma, we don't have a lot of federal land. We have some, but we don't have a lot. We have an environmentally sound but industry-friendly regulatory system with our corporation commission here. So I think you're actually going to see more activity in places like Oklahoma and Texas. The places that are really getting hurt are places with lots of federal lands. That'd be like New Mexico, Wyoming, Arizona, the western states. It's a problem. And again, overall, as production drops, prices go up, no question about that. So all I can tell you is we have a lot of Oklahoma companies, of course, active in those areas. We're pushing pretty hard. You actually have some unlikely allies. There are certainly people in New Mexico, which is a historically Democratic state, that are not happy about this because it's a huge part of their revenue that funds their local schools and local government. So I think you're going to see pushback, and particularly as the price of gasoline increases, every American is pretty sensitive to that in this country. So, again, there aren't any Republican votes to speak of for these kind of measures. Lots of opposition, and we're hopeful we'll get more of our Democratic friends, when they hear from their constituents about the cost of this, to change and be on our side. But, again, elections have consequences. The president will be president for 4 years, and he can use executive orders to get a lot of this stuff done, which is exactly what he did in terms of the Keystone pipelines, exactly what he did in terms of the suspension of permits on federal lands for oil and gas development.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question, but just a quick reminder that if you would like to opt in to future telephone town halls like this, just press 1. Again, to opt in to future calls like this, just press 1. Our next question comes from Dana from Norman, has a question about H.R. 1.
Dana, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Doing well, sir. Thank you for this opportunity.
I think I got your name wrong. I apologize.
No worries.
Go ahead.
So my concern is you're seeing a lot of legislation that really does favor the Democratic Party and those that are sympathetic to it. And one of most concern is H.R. 1 because it would basically make it nearly impossible to have a fair election. And that's trying to be pushed to the states on how they hold their elections. What are the conservatives, what are the Republicans doing to block this?
Quite a bit, actually. On H.R. 1, I actually was the first person to speak against it because it had to come through the Rules Committee where I'm the top Republican and then spoke against it on the floor, obviously, as well. We put every single Republican vote that we had on the board against H.R. 1. We actually picked up a couple of Democrats. By the way, this is a bill that's very close to something we stopped in the last Congress, and Oklahomans did their part by making a change in the 5th District. The vote this time was actually closer than it was in the last Congress in the House of Representatives because we picked up 12 seats, and all 12 of those new members all voted against H.R. 1, along with every other Republican and a couple of Democrats. And by the way, I want to tip my hat. We got a great letter from the Secretary of the Oklahoma Election Board. A lot of you may not know who he is, the guy named Paul Xerox. I think he's been there since 2009. Really, we have great election security and efficiency in Oklahoma and very few disputes. And he sent us, every member of our delegation, a letter as to how H.R. 1 would, number one, cost Oklahomans a lot of money. Number two, take away state and local authority in elections, and three, make our elections less secure. And my good friend, our new member, Stephanie Bice from the 5th District, basically Oklahoma City, Pott, and Seminole counties, entered that letter into the record on our behalf. The Democrats have not been able to move this yet through the United States Senate. There was an interesting hearing on it a couple of weeks ago, and there's not a Republican vote for it. The only way this bill would become law would be if the Democrats remove the filibuster. And the filibuster in the Senate means you have to get to 60, which means you have to compromise, find some common ground. And there's a lot of Democrats that don't want to do that. Now, not every Democrat has signed off on H.R. 1 or its Senate equivalent, Senate 1 yet, but a lot of pressure is being raised that if you're not for this, that you're for suppression of the vote and you're racist or what have you. That hasn't moved any Republican votes. That means even the moderate Republicans so far have been against this. A lot of them just because the Constitution's pretty clear the states should run elections. Now, if there's a violation of civil rights, the federal government certainly could intervene, but the states have the right to decide how they're going to, conduct elections. Again, most secretaries of state, Democrat as well as Republican, actually oppose H.R. 1 and don't want to make the kinds of changes that are mandated. So I can tell you it's just a live question. If the filibuster survives in the Senate, H.R. 1 will not become law. If for some reason it was eliminated, we would still have a chance to stop it because I do think there are some Democratic senators that are uneasy with this, but the chances of it becoming law and federalizing your elections, where the decisions about elections would be made in Washington, D.C., not in Oklahoma City and at your county election boards, would happen. By the way, there are a lot of things that don't get a lot of publicity in this that ought to. It would provide a 6-to-1 federal match. In other words, you would start using taxpayer dollars to help politicians get elected for contributions under $200. That's a bad thing. Right now, the Federal Election Commission is evenly balanced between the two parties, 3-3. This would change that and make it a partisan body, where right now, of course, the Democrats would enjoy a 3-2 majority. So any contest, if it fell along partisan lines, wouldn't be a deadlock. It would go to the majority party. And there's a lot of what's called ballot harvesting would become illegal. Right now in Oklahoma, you have to get the ballot in by the close of election day. This would allow up to 10 days after. So you wouldn't have ballot. You wouldn't have election days. You'd really have election weeks. So a lot of problems with this legislation. You're right to be concerned about it, but it's It'll be up to the Senate on the filibuster as to whether or not if they keep that, it won't become law. If they change it, it might.
All right. Moving on to our next question, we have Cody from Moore.
Hey, Cody. How are you?
Hey, Congressman Coe. How are you today?
Great. I always like to get a call from my hometown.
Yeah, we miss you down here.
Well, hey, I'm still there. I'll be there tonight.
Well, a couple of questions. As you know, state of Oklahoma was hit pretty hard with one of the biggest, coldest ice storms since 1899. And a lot of Oklahomans received a letter from OG&E stating that over the next 10 years, they're going to increase our bills due to the expense they occurred during this, what now is called, we got disaster funds from the federal government. And my question regarding that is the federal funds that we received from the U.S. government here in Oklahoma for that disaster, why couldn't them funds be earmarked to offset that cost with the utility companies instead of putting it on the taxpayers?
Well, that is a great question. Remember, the legislation had already been passed before the storm hit, so the parameters that it can be spent on are limited by that. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility there. There's also legislation in front of the state legislature, and I want to be careful here because I don't try to get into state matters, and I respect the jurisdiction, but there is a mechanism called securitization where they spread out and lower the cost to taxpayers. It has to be done right, and I know the state legislature happened to be up there earlier this week, is really focused on trying to work this out to try and give Oklahoma ratepayers the best possible deal. I also met today, honestly, with the people that run our municipal power companies across Oklahoma. They had some, again, similar ideas as to things that could make this a little more bearable. So far, there's not been a big federal look at this. Obviously, it doesn't affect everybody. Hit Texas, Oklahoma, and kind of the middle of the country, Kansas, Missouri, sort of the heartland area is pretty hard, but it's not of tremendous interest on the east or west coast. So I'm not familiar with any legislation right now that's working its way through the system on this, although we'll certainly look at this. I don't sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee where it would tend to come. But I think the best efforts here are probably going to be what the state does in the short term. We have, just so you know, been in communication, and every member of our delegation has, with OG&E and POS, our rural electric co-ops, our different people. So we are trying to work with them and see if there are ways, again, that we can do things that minimize the impact on Oklahoma ratepayers. But it just was a freak storm, and we were seeing temperatures that we haven't seen in 120 years. And while we went through a difficult time here, thank goodness we weren't Texas. We didn't have people that lost power for days on end. I kind of tip my hat to everybody in the Oklahoma power industry because they've been hit with a tremendous bill, but they kept us warm and safe, and they had some controlled outages, as they call them, but I don't think any of them lasted for more than 2 or 3 hours, and they were scattered around the states. Again, we didn't go days without power and terrible weather. We didn't lose anybody because they, honestly died in their homes. Texas did, and so thank goodness that our folks that are professional have done the job that they've done, and we got through this. But if we can find some ways to minimize the cost, believe me, we will.
All right, we'll go on to our next question, but if you would like to ask a question, just press *3. We are running out of time, but there might still be time to get your question in this evening. Our next question comes from Brandon from Ardmore.
Hey, Brandon, how are you?
Doing good, Mr. Congressman Cole. It's good to talk to you again. My question being, I am a veteran, and Oklahoma has an awesome veteran community. My main concern being the vice president and her opinion of getting, pretty much doing away with veterans benefits and stuff like that. I don't know the president's feelings on it, but I feel that, I'm all for the veterans that want to working, but some of us that are, 100% don't have that option because we have complete and permanent and total on our disabilities, which means we cannot work.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the president feels about this, if it's going anywhere, but it is a great concern to myself and many other veterans in the community.
First and foremost, thank you very much for your service. And you're quite right. This is a very veterans-heavy district, partly because of the presence of Fort Sill and Tinker Air Force Base. We have a lot of National Guard presence, but mostly because Oklahomans enlist at a higher rate than people in most other states, quite frankly. So proud trip. My dad was a 20-year career Air Force non-commissioned officer, and by the way, had Alzheimer's, spent the last 12 years of his life in veterans facilities, 6 of them in Ardmore, 6 of them in Norman, where he got great care at both places. And so I'm a big believer. And my brother had a disability from the Vietnam era, not related to Vietnam, but an accident that he had when he was in the Air Force. So again, I'm very supportive of this community, and I can just assure you that we will not be cutting veterans benefits. This is actually something that there are a lot of Democrats and Republicans that feel very strongly about this issue. So now, no matter what's proposed, and I'm like you, I've never heard President Biden talk about wanting to cut veterans benefits, so I don't believe he does want to. But I don't think there would be the congressional support to do that. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, and we spend more money on veterans, not than any other country in the world, but than every other country in the world combined. And we do that because that's what the American people want to do. They value the service that's given. We have an all-volunteer force, we promise you some things when you make that decision as a young man or young woman that you're going to run a risk to protect the rest of us. And we need to honor that commitment that we've made. If we don't, you're not going to have people stepping up, and it's just not something that we should ever contemplate. So I feel pretty good that we will continue to build on the system we have. It's not perfect, but we have a wounded warrior that works for us in my office that deals with veterans issues. It's based in Lawton, but obviously helps across the entire district, and we're very proud of him and the service he rendered our country, and very proud of the people that he helps each and every day. So again, I promise you that I don't think that'll happen on anybody's watches now. And you don't have to worry about, again, the Oklahoma delegation, our people. You don't have a stronger defender of the United States military than Jim Inhofe, and the entire delegation is absolutely determined we're not going to see reductions in veterans benefits, for goodness sake. And I think that's true of a bipartisan majority in Congress. I could point you to a lot of my Democratic colleagues that I might disagree with on other issues. We don't disagree on this. So I feel pretty comfortable we'll be able to protect your benefits, and certainly not seeing you forced into the workplace when you've got a disability that prevents it.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. Probably have time for one or two more. But again, if you would like to opt into future telephone town halls, just press 1. Our next question is from Kathy. She's also from Moore, Oklahoma.
Hey, Kathy, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thank you for what you do for our nation in Oklahoma.
Thank you.
My concern is the border wall, and has the money already been appropriated? Have the contractors already been paid? I know they've seen pictures of so can the states come along and finish those areas that have not been completed?
Texas actually has deployed its National Guard and additional law enforcement units to try and help, but no, they really don't have the authority to do it. The money was appropriated. There's still money available. and there are materials available. They literally stopped at midnight on January 20th, and we've got some things that even if you didn't agree with the wall, you'd say, well, you should finish what you've got the materials for, you appropriated the money for. Because, look, I wouldn't tell anybody that a border is the only security, but it works, and it does funnel the population into areas where you can then concentrate more border security. And so it's just a mistake. We built a lot of border wall under President George W. Bush. We actually built border wall under President Obama, although Democrats seem to forget about it. We certainly built well over 400 miles of additional border wall under President Trump. We should finish that network. It makes a difference. And the other thing we should do is broadcast the message that we are serious. Look, we're a pretty generous country about you coming into the country legally. We bring over 1 million people legally into the United States a year. Those aren't visitors. Those are people that are coming in as permanent residents because they played by the rules, met the conditions, but we are more generous than any other country. So I understand why people want to get to the United States, particularly from some of the countries they're fleeing, but you just can't have an unlimited influx, and it is dangerous. We have caught a number of people that are on the terrorist watch list. It's not just people from Central and America that are coming up. There are people there, and there's a lot of human trafficking and over $70 billion of illegal drugs coming across that border. So for goodness sake, we ought to be very robust in defending it. We made some progress. Again, you can agree or disagree with President Trump, but he made progress, and we're seeing a lot of that lost here and just willy-nilly reversing his orders. And the consequences are more people, more drugs, more crime, and in the age of COVID, sadly, more potential virus and infection across that border. That's just not good policy. It's a mistake. But American people need to correct that at the polls next time if they're concerned about the border. And again, I think this is an issue that isn't likely to go away anytime soon. So we're just going to have to keep wrestling with it as a country.
All right. Our next question comes from Ethel, and she has a question about hospitals.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Congressman Cole. I am not in the medical arena, but I am concerned about when you say that the businesses will be taxed heavier. Will that include, I know there are some hospitals that are for-profit and some that are not. I'm worried about getting help for the hospitals.
Well, you're right to be worried because our healthcare system has really been overextended and overextended during the pandemic, and our healthcare professionals have really done an unbelievable job. We have injected a lot of money in these various coronavirus bills to try and help healthcare providers deal with this, the crisis that we've had. But yeah, if you're for profit, again, I haven't seen all the president's proposal yet, just was released today. I would assume you would be subject to the same corporate increase in taxes. Now, again, we do a lot of things to try and support hospitals, and we'll continue to do that. We know how critical that is for our citizens, but look, I just personally feel higher corporate taxes are a big mistake. The average corporate tax rate in the world is about 21%. That's what ours is at now. If you remember a few years ago, you couldn't pick up the business pages without hearing about another American corporation moving overseas to get a lower tax rate. I'll give you an example. Right here in Norman, we have a company has 1,700 jobs here, but their corporate headquarters was located in Milwaukee. They moved overseas to Ireland because the corporate rate was 12%. And look, businesses are going to move to where there's lower tax rates. So, we need to be competitive. We stopped that with the reduction in corporate taxes. And by the way, corporations, people don't think about it, are really taxed twice. We tax the corporation, then it distributes its profit to its shareholders. That's called capital gains. We tax that again on the individual basis. So, it's not that these industries aren't taxed, and I think it's a big mistake, particularly if we do it in vital areas like hospitals. But to be fair, I want to add the caveat, I have not looked at it down to the level of knowing whether or not hospitals would be hit, for-profit hospitals. Non-profits should not be hit, I would think. But we'll look into that and try to be aware of it.
All right, we have time for one last quick question from Kathy from Lawton.
Hello.
Kathy, are you
Hi, Kathy. This is Tom Cole. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question on the VA benefits. Lawton has an enormous amount of veterans. I have a loved one who is on chemo, and we have an excellent cancer center with our Comanche County Memorial Hospital. She was receiving chemo there at the cancer center, and on her private insurance. But her costs got so expensive, she just couldn't afford it any longer. She is 100% disabled, so she applied through the VA. The VA, of course, agreed and tried to work with the cancer center here in Lawton and said that they would pay for her treatment, whatever they charged. But our cancer center refused to take the VA money. And so she has to go every week, a 100-mile trip one way to Oklahoma City to the VA there for her treatment. Sometimes she has to go 2 times a week, where she could just go 2 miles down the road to receive it. But Comanche County Hospital will not take the VA payments. And I don't understand, nobody understands why this could happen, why any health institution center could refuse to take the VA payments, especially someone, a center who is receiving federal funds. And I think that this really needs to be looked into by you and our other elected officials and anyone else who can. This just does not seem to be right. Have you ever...
Go ahead. Go ahead, Kathy. I'm sorry. Well, let me respond quickly, if I may. Obviously, I don't know about the specifics of the case. If we would, it would be helpful if Kathy would call our Lawton office. I don't know if this is veterans related where she's concerned or whatever, but if you'll call our office, we will certainly look into it. We try to work and make sure that certainly every veteran gets the appropriate benefits, and if we've got a problem here, we'll do it. And again, without knowing more specifically about it, and we would have to have a release from Kathy to be able to inquire on her behalf, both in terms of the VA and in terms of the local health care facility. But again, that does sound odd to me, and we're happy to try and work with her and make sure. I will say this, and I don't want to brag, but we have great caseworkers in our office. And so if you've got a particular problem with an agency or a benefit that you're entitled to, as a Social Security or Medicare, I can't guarantee we can get it for you, but I can guarantee you we've got somebody that'll listen to your issue and try and work it to a resolution and get the right thing done, and they succeed a lot. So I would encourage anybody on these calls who've got specific things like that to call the office. Again, we have to have a release. There's paperwork. We can't just call willy-nilly because somebody called on somebody's behalf. We have to hear from the person. They have to give us a release form so we can advocate on their behalf. But we will try and do that. We certainly want people that have earned benefits to be able to get them. And, by and large, I have to say, most of our healthcare providers in this district, I will tell you, try to do the right thing. They're interested in helping people. So I'm a little mystified by this case, but again, we're very, very willing to do it. And you can call our Norman line, 405-329-6500. Again, 405-329-6500. We'll put you in touch with our caseworker. You've got, by the way, an office in Lawton itself, so if you want to make a local call there, you can do that. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but I know it's not hard to find. So anything we can do to be helpful to people that are in the situations like you just described, we want to do. So with that, let me end with this because I know Sarah will want to wrap us up. Just number one, thank you very much for taking the time to send in your question. If we didn't get to it, I hope you left your question on our recorded lines. We'll have somebody get back with you and answer that. We'll try to do more of these things, particularly during the era of COVID. We've not been able to do the town halls we normally like to do, and these things seem to work well and be popular. So we'll certainly continue to do them. And just thank all of you again for your time and your interest and your concerns. We learn a lot every time we do one of these things. We hear questions. So you helped us a lot tonight. And again, if you've got additional questions, we'll try and get back to you with answers. With that, Sarah, let me turn it over to you to close us out.